Thank you so much for Ishtamo for that introduction. And I hope you can hear me and see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, thanks. And I've had such an inspiring day, and I know it's been a long day for us. And thanks for hanging on still, those of you who are there. So I'll be the last presenter today. Okay, I'll try to change. Right. So I'll give first a bit of background shortly. So this research that I do and that I present to you here is part of the project Climate Sustainability in the Kitchen, Everyday Food Cultures in Transition, where I'm involved. And this is conducted at the University of Helsinki. And I know that at least one colleague is there. So hi, Kura, I noticed you are present. So very happy to be in this project team. And there we are actually studying cultural change towards more sustainable ways of living and eating, and particularly focusing on veganism. And my research focuses on vegan men and masculinities, and that's what I'll be presenting today as well. And you can kind of Google this if you're interested. We have a Facebook page as well. And particularly this talk today, presentation is based on a forthcoming book chapter. In this project, we are going to be publishing a book with the tentative title, Developing Feminist Animal Studies, Critical Perspectives on Food and Eating. So hopefully this will be out probably next year, but we'll see. Right, so I'll go into my topic, and I'll start with a bit of background. As we know, we are living in this era of the Anthropocene, where we are facing, as humanity, several crises. So there's a crisis of ethics in human-animal relations. More than 70 billion land animals are killed for food every year. And there is an ecological crisis, which is largely related to that. So eating animals is a leading cause of human-induced climate change. And of course, besides the devastating consequences of this to non-human animals, there are also profound effects, impacts of the animal industry on human beings, and particularly those who are more vulnerable, which has been documented extensively. And veganism could be one way to mitigate these crises. Of course, this is also, gender is actually really important here. And I'm particularly looking at the role of men and masculinities. So what is also known is that men, particularly privileged white men, and masculine values have been the key drivers of climate change. And also we know that men's overall ecological footprint is larger than women's, including their footprint from food. Men consume, compared to women, more meat globally. And kind of following from this, we need urgently to cultivate more ecologically sustainable masculinities that are also more egalitarian and caring towards human and non-human lives. And I think then here, brings me to vegan men. It is useful to study men whose values and practices may help to contribute to these ideals. And so about vegan men and masculinity. So vegan men's food practices cause less harm to non-human animals and are more ecologically sustainable. And of course, this is about all vegans, not just men. And actually, there has been some research on veganism, linking it to men and masculinities. That has been quite interesting research, and broadly some findings concern the potential of veganism to change the way that men do masculinity. And it has been argued that veganism offers potential for doing masculinity differently. When men become vegan, they negotiate new non-normative masculinities that can challenge our traditional understandings of what it means to be manly. And also there is work by ecofeminist scholars, Carol Adams and others, who have talked about, the consumption of other animals, and by refraining from doing this, men disrupt the link between hegemonic masculinity and meat eating, which can then change masculinity. But then there's been some other research which has found that actually vegan men may leave some gendered and other power relations unchallenged. So it doesn't always mean that by going vegan, they profoundly challenge unequal gender relations in society. And I think this is a very interesting question, the kind of links between men masculinities, veganism and inequalities. And I think it could be studied further. And that's something I've tackled in my research. So this is the focus of what I talk about in this chapter and today. So the potential of men's veganism to foster more alternative egalitarian masculinities. And, does it kind of encourage or enable this? And I kind of look at today in this presentation three realms. So constructing how vegan men construct their identity and their gender and intersectional politics and practices. The second is cultivating empathy and expressing emotions and their relationship to food and cooking. So these latter two being very feminized kind of realms of activity. So this is based on empirical research, which I conducted already now 2 or 3 years ago. And so I interviewed 62 vegan men from Finland and Estonia. And so they're quite lengthy qualitative interviews. So we talked about in these interviews about becoming vegan, so their kind of transition narratives, their experiences of living as a vegan, what meanings they attributed to veganism, and also the issue of gender and masculinity and how that links to veganism. One thing I should say about this group of men is that they are quite a particular group. So they are white, they are ethnic Estonian and Finnish, middle class, and they live in urban areas, and they mostly have higher education. So this is a very privileged group, and that should be taken into account when kind of analyzing their narratives. But yeah, so I kind of pretty much argue here that some of their practices and values can contribute to the emergence of more egalitarian masculinities, a kind of more positive way of doing masculinity. So that's what I'll be kind of showing in my next slides. And overall, according to these men, so going vegan brought about or facilitated a transformation in their sense of self and other core values, and it led to new practices and including some new ways of doing masculinity towards more egalitarianism and care. So first, this out of those three aspects that I'll be covering, the kind of like identity construction. And interestingly, the men didn't see any conflict between their masculine identity and veganism, which is culturally coded as feminine. And how they achieved this was by distinguishing themselves as an exceptional man. So they kind of like saw themselves as standing above or being able to resist societal norms of masculinity. And particularly, they kind of constructed themselves as different from non-vegan men. And this was seen as a kind of, not just by rejecting animal products from their lives, but as a broader way of doing masculinity. And I always like to illustrate my talks with quotes from the interviews, and here is one. They're all pseudonyms I'm using to refer to these men. And Tabani from Finland says, all the vegan men I know definitely don't fit in the traditional masculinity box. So he's making this statement about the vegan men. So going beyond just the diet here. And also the men were critical of kind of some masculine practices, particularly with the Finnish research participants. Several rejected this kind of compulsory army service for men, and they didn't go and do that service. And so, yeah, they kind of claim not to correspond to some conventional ideals of masculinity. And I do have here a quote also to illustrate that by Lucas, who says, I often feel like if I meet another man that is vegan, that there's a high chance of getting along with that person. They have kind of similar tempers, for instance, a kind of openness and softness about them that I feel is often lacking with other men who I might be friends with. But I might feel like if they don't, or if they aren't open to vegetarianism or veganism, then they might have these other kinds of masculine beliefs that I feel really uncomfortable with. Veganism, especially with men, it very often goes hand in hand with kind of critical ideas about gender or politics as well. I don't know, it might be like generalizing, but I often feel like some friends who are not vegetarian, like male friends in my community, they were like a bit more likely shittier boyfriends, for instance, or like had these other beliefs that I have found harmful as well, and they are not as trustworthy. So that's what he says. He's making quite kind of profound statements about vegan men. So they kind of, the way they talked about themselves was that there are these societal norms of masculinity that prevent other men from going vegan, but they have kind of successfully negotiated those norms and have gone vegan. They kind of also, it was quite typical that so this difference from other men was kind of present even before going vegan. And here Oscar from Finland says, I think that the pressure from others is the main reason that why men don't become vegan. You don't want to be the freak, like the only one, like me. In my work, we have like 50 people. I'm the only one who is vegan or vegetarian. So I think the pressure is the main reason. So here he is sort of saying that he has been successful in overcoming these pressures. And so they were quite proud of kind of this difference. And definitely here the privilege of these men is quite important to consider, that it is always more comfortable and easier for privileged individuals or groups to kind of stand out from others, because they do not risk being ostracized or marginalized for challenging some powerful social norms. And also the men shared experiences of situations where they in fact have challenged traditional ways of doing masculinity. And some of these examples related to how like men typically bond with each other over taking part in killing or eating non-human animals. So for instance here, I'm not going to read them out because kind of lack of time, but Lucas here is talking about how when he went vegan, he kind of and before that he had been going fishing with his father, but then kind of informed his father that he's no longer going to do that, and he felt uncomfortable because he felt he's breaking a certain bond that he had with his father by kind of saying that he's not going to participate in this fishing practice anymore. And then Tanel from Estonia kind of talks about, I used to drink and smoke and eat with my friends, and I don't really have friends anymore. Our only common language was alcohol, partying, you know. So kind of by rejecting those kind of masculine practices, they kind of you know, constructed themselves and felt different from other men, and kind of felt like they have kind of broken some bonds with them other men. This now my second kind of point here concerning empathy and emotions. And of course, we know that emotions are gendered, they are culturally feminized and undervalued, as we heard also in other presentations before. And actually, but we know also from ecofeminist work in particular that the care and emotions are really important in relating to human and non-human others. And that, you know, these dualisms, which are kind of false between emotions versus rationality, nature and versus culture, should be challenged. And always, you know, rationality and emotions are entangled in human experience. So it's been argued that an orientation towards care and caring and emotional literacy are not part of dominant masculinity scripts, and so men typically lack these capacities. But yeah, veganism kind of allows us to rethink hierarchical and exploitative human-animal relations, and it broadens our moral circle of compassion and care, and encourages a compassionate response to the suffering of non-human animals. And for men in particular, veganism offers the potential to engage in and to strengthen their sense of and relationship of care with others, and then develop kind of empathy and emotional literacy. And again here, like what I found is that the men kind of saw themselves as standing out, that they are kind of able to cultivate this empathy and have been able to do that through becoming vegan. And they compare themselves in a way with this figure of a typical man that they constructed, who then lacks these capacities. So they again say that kind of like they were able to overcome these cultural norms of masculinity. Here Raido from Estonia is saying, I read part of this quote: "If you're a classical man, then empathy is the last thing you think about. If you did, then people would perhaps perceive you as a softie." So this is like this understanding of like, that's how typical masculinity is constructed in a society, but these vegan men were kind of not, they kind of claimed not to, like they claim that they can surpass this or kind of overcome these expectations for men. And also, interestingly, some of the research participants claim that they have always been more empathetic or having developed these qualities upon going vegan. And interestingly too, like when we think that, veganism particularly maybe encourages the development of empathy towards non-human animals, what I found that some men really claimed that their kind of empathy and understanding of other human beings has increased. And this certainly for several of them wasn't easy in the beginning. They experienced emotions such as anger and frustration upon going vegan when learning about the horrors of the animal industry. But then they were kind of able to overcome this, and partly this was this happened through kind of having to be constantly explaining others their choices, like why they have gone vegan, and so this kind of just talking a lot with other people and kind of exercising their patience helped to kind of overcome these frustrations, and then to cultivate this sense of like empathy of others towards others. But maybe one of the most interesting things I found, that there was a kind of mismatch between what the men experience and feel personally, so empathy towards animals, and how they represent veganism to others. So the latter was done by relying on more like facts and kind of rational arguments. And definitely this strategy is informed by cultural norms of masculinity. So vegan men are wary of how they may come across to other non-vegan men if they emphasize compassion towards non-human animal suffering as a reason or primary reason behind their veganism. So Ott from Estonia is saying, well, I was vegan for ethical reasons right from the start, but in the beginning, I remember not saying this when people asked why I'm vegan. I think I just said, just because I want to. I was ashamed to say that I'm vegan for ethical reasons. I've seen other men who, well, I'm not going to name names, but I know people who don't want to say that they're ethical vegans, but I believe they actually are. Can I just ask how much time I have, because I can't see that on my screen?
Yes, just continue.
No, but if you could tell me how many minutes.
Yeah, it's 2 minutes, but yeah.
Fine, then I'll be really wrapping up. Thanks. Yeah, so pretty much what the men then did was that they emphasized the environmental aspects of veganism instead of the ethics. So that was kind of their strategy. And I think this kind of, in this way, the men may be reproducing some cultural masculinity scripts. And so this may actually not contribute to more egalitarian gender relations in this aspect. And shortly, I could say the cooking. So this was also food and cooking, obviously, are very gendered, associated with women. And going vegan for these men changed their food practices. They kind of like started cooking more and paid attention to the nutrition and health aspects of food more. Also there were examples of where like they kind of rethought this kind of domestic roles. Like, here is a story of a research participant who had he used to think that it's his wife his wife's job to do the cooking, but then he kind of started cooking when he was vegan, and he kind of rethought those typical gendered roles. And yeah, so I really wrap up here. So I think these examples show that kind of what vegan men do and their values and also practices kind of point to they do masculinity in somewhat more positive ways compared to these ideals of masculinity, cultural ideals of masculinity that contain a lot of these negative elements. So I think this kind of really, in a small way, they kind of contribute to changing masculine ideals, which I think that currently in the current crisis that we are amidst, that actually masculine ideals are changing anyway. So perhaps like it will be more valued in men, the kind of caring orientations, caring about nature, about non-human others, and also, of course, the more egalitarian kind of orientation now with the Me Too movement and everything. So I think this cultural transformation is happening, and vegan men kind of help contribute towards that. And this was kind of, I had a lot of text in my last slides, but I think this kind of encapsulated what I wanted to say as a kind of conclusion here. So I will stop here. Thank you.